Welcome to Courageous Conversations with Bron Williams. Courageous conversations are often the ones that we do not want to have, but we know are important. So join with me as I explore how we can have courageous conversations and who and what we can have courageous conversations with. You're just a scaredy cat. I'm sure you were on the receiving end of this common schoolyard taunt at some time during your childhood years. The words were often used as a dare to make us take part in an activity that we didn't really want to, or to prove that we weren't afraid of doing whatever the child taunting us suggested. We didn't want to appear afraid. Now, as adults, we know that our fears don't subside when we leave childhood. In many cases, they magnify as we add people and possessions to our lives that are important to us. But we still have to face the world. We work at not allowing our fears to shape our decisions. While fear has been described as false evidence appearing real, our fears are often well-founded, and they are unsettling, and they take us often into an uncomfortable place. I believe it's important that we honour our fears rather than dismissing them or ignoring them. And in terms of personal safety, for women, often our fears are very real. And just in a similar way, our fears concerning our financial security and loneliness as we grow older. It's important that we not only acknowledge our fears but honour them in our lives. It's only as we own and honour our fears that we have the choice as to what to do with them. Fear is a thief because fear robs us of joy. Whoever has been happy when they've been anxious or afraid? Those two emotions cannot coexist. Fear also robs us of opportunities. Fear looks at what is or what may be and then decides there's no point in trying anymore, or attempting something different, or even getting up one more time. Fear inhibits us. Inhibitions are ideas and attitudes that constrain us either to a particular way of thinking or from behaving in ways that are not permissible. Many of the inhibitions that limit our lives were formed unconsciously in childhood and our adolescence, either through the modelling of significant adults in our lives or through negative or traumatic experience. Inhibitions are often called hang-ups. They make us feel self-conscious or unable to act in a relaxed and natural way. They can also be a nervous feeling that prevents us from expressing our thoughts, our emotions or desires. Inhibitions constrain us within prescribed boundaries, often not of our own making. Inhibitions hinder, impede and obstruct our growth into whole human beings. Inhibitions hamper us and slow us down. When we want to move forward, inhibitions bring discouragement, especially when we try new and unaccustomed things. Question for you. In which areas of your life do you feel restrained, as if something is holding you back? Are there things that you feel you can't or mustn't do? Fear also robs the present and the future. Fear is a kind of aversion. To be averse to something is to loathe it, to be hostile or unwilling. These are very strong ideas, and perhaps you may be wondering how you can have an aversion and not know it. But aversions can take the subtler form of fears, and it is from that angle that I want to approach the idea of aversions in our lives. Singer-songwriter Jules says, "Fear is a thief, and it takes the past and projects it into the future, and it robs you of the only opportunity you have to create change." I love that idea, that fear takes what's happened in the past and then, like a movie projector, projects the past into the future and says, well, what's happened in the past is going to happen in the future. And it robs us of the opportunity for new things, for change. It's so important that we need to take some time now, even what are the things that you're convinced are impossible for you, even though others can do it. Secondly, fear writes narratives, writes stories. I realised at one point in my life I have an inherited fear. I'm the eldest of my siblings. As a child, I can remember going shopping with Mum, and she'd make comments like, "Oh, I have to dip into next week's housekeeping," or that she would rob Peter to pay Paul. I learned from these comments that money was limited. There was only so much pie to go around. However, I have realised that what I was also hearing was that you stole money, robbed Peter, to make ends meet, robbing Peter to pay Paul. Although I understood the principle, the word I heard was rob, to steal, to thieve, to take what is not yours. I unconsciously then connected money with doing something illegal. I can see now that I carried not only a negative narrative around money, that it's limited, but an even deeper one that told me that being involved with money was intrinsically wrong. To help on my journey of letting go of this narrative of a fear around money, I wrote a letter to my mum, who has been gone for a number of years now, forgiving her for passing on these unhelpful messages. I knew she didn't mean to, but the result was the same. Even if Mum was still alive, I wouldn't have given her the letter because that's not the point. I also wrote a letter to my younger self, forgiving her for taking these messages on board and allowing them to rule her thinking about money. Then I burnt both letters. I may well be influenced by this fear for the rest of my life because it's deeply ingrained in my thinking. However, now that I know what it is, now that I've brought the fear out into the open, I can choose how I will respond when next it rears its ugly head. I can call it out for the lie that it is and choose to let it go. What stories do you remember from childhood that still influence your thinking today? Stories that limit you in some way. Thirdly, fear blinds us to the truth because it acts as blinkers. Now, I'm sure you've seen racehorses are often fitted with blinkers by their trainers, so they will not be distracted during a race by what's happening around them. The blinkers keep the horse focused on the racetrack in front of them. However, rather than keeping us focused in a healthy way, our fears can act like blinkers by preventing us from having a wider view of the world. Our fears ensure that we have a narrower outlook where we don't even consider certain options or people because they lie outside what we believe is correct and good. We have these blinkers because we've been taught that the way we see the world is the right way or the normal way, and we don't need to see any other options than the ones right in front of us. Fear narrows our vision. Second, fear acts as filters. Some people are accused of looking at the world through rose-coloured glasses. Such people only see what they want to see and filter out the difficulties that it would be helpful to consider. These people can find themselves in difficult situations that they didn't expect because they chose to look at life in a very limited way. Now, coloured filters are also used in photography and in sunglasses in specific ways, either to reduce or remove unwanted colours of light. If you look at a picture through a coloured filter, that filter will only allow light of its own colour to pass through and will block or absorb other colours of light. For example, if you look at a blue and red picture through a blue filter, only the blue light reflected off the blue ink can pass through the blue filter. So you'll only see those parts of the picture that are coloured blue and the rest will be obscured. Our fears also act like filters, not in a rose-coloured glasses kind of way, but by colouring everything darkly so that we cannot see the hope or the possibility in a situation we're in. Because fear then filters out hope and possibility. And then fear can act as lenses, magnifying and minimising. If we think of famous people who use a lens, the magnifying glass of Sherlock Holmes comes to mind as he searches out clues to help solve the latest mystery. In Holmes's world, a magnifying glass is used to make things larger so that they're more easily seen. In a similar way, older people use magnifying glasses to read more clearly, and jewellers use them to see the true worth or the flaws in gemstones. But fears also magnify or minimise, allowing some situations to appear much worse than they really are, or by minimising the value of options we have to improve our situation. Take a moment to think for yourself. What fears do you recognise that are acting like blinkers, filters, or lenses in your life? It is actually important to honour our fears because they don't arise in a vacuum. There is a reason for them. That's why it's important to honour our fears. We need to own and acknowledge our fears because once they're out in the open, we can look at them more objectively and then decide whether they're giving us an accurate picture of our life and the situations we find ourselves in. Once we see what narratives we have around fear in specific areas, we can choose to write a new narrative. One way to rewrite our fear narratives is by doing an exercise called clarity by contrast. You find a notebook, a piece of paper, real paper, not anything electronic, and on the left-hand side, write down all the fears, narratives, messages that you live by, the thoughts that come unbidden into your head. Then on the right-hand side, write the opposite, a more positive alternative, and cross out the corresponding idea on the left-hand side of the page. Let me give you an example. A fear that I had was something from what I'd observed in my family, of my siblings who were younger than me and moving into semi-retirement while I was building a business. What was I thinking? The fear that I identified was that I'm too old to be developing a business. This was unhelpful. I was letting other people's lives and decisions determine what I should do. So I flipped that thought to, I'm just the right age to be doing this. And interestingly, as I started to tell myself each time that fear came up, I would say, no, I'm just the right age to be doing this. I realised that I couldn't actually have done this work, built this business before now because there were other important things that were taking my time and energy. Clarity by contrast is a great way to identify the unhelpful narratives in our lives and replace them with the things that are truly important to us. So, have you got some paper with you? Do clarity by contrast now. Put down 1, 2, 3, even 5 of those unhelpful thoughts on the left-hand side of the page. Then think of a more positive alternative and cross out that unhelpful one. Say those positive alternatives to yourself every day because they will then replace the negative fears that you have in your life. courageous conversations can actually help us with our long-held beliefs. What did you grow up believing? I'm not talking about Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, or the Tooth Fairy. Those are stories we outgrow. I'm thinking more of the stories we take with us into adulthood about who we are, our place in the world, what we should or shouldn't do, what we can or cannot be. I'm thinking of the stories that shapes the perceptions we have of ourselves, the stories that shape the perceptions others have of us, the stories that we live by. Let me tell you one of my stories. I grew up in a conservative Christian family. My mum and dad both worked for the Commonwealth Bank, which is one of the major banks here in Australia, when they met. But once they married, Mum had to relinquish her position. In the early 1950s, married women were not able to hold a position as they were potentially taking a job from a married man with a family to support. As their eldest child, there were unwritten expectations that I absorbed as norms for my life, including that marriage and children were the prime role for women. And I did just that. I left my role as a teacher when we started to try for a family, and raising my sons became the focus of my life. Now, I'm not denigrating that role. It's a wonderful and fulfilling role. But if I felt I had other choices, I would have chosen another course, a greater focus on academia and much less on getting married and having a family. It took a troubled marriage that I couldn't save, no matter how hard I tried, separation and divorce, for me to really consider that I could shape a new story for my life, that I no longer needed to live within the parameters and boundaries my family and faith culture told me were the only options for women. It takes courage to challenge long-held beliefs. It takes courage to examine what we've believed and decide if it remains true, helpful, useful, or appropriate for our lives. And then it takes courage to step away from those long-held beliefs and forge a new story. But it can be done. I did it. Beliefs can shape us. There are a couple of ways of looking at what we believe. One is that our beliefs are foundational to our lives. We build our lives on what we believe. The second is that our beliefs are coherent. They work together to make a coherent whole. Being part of a faith system such as Christianity, I grew up with foundational beliefs about God, about how the world operated and what was at the heart of people. Those beliefs shaped how I saw the world and how I related to other people. As I've grown older, I've moved away from the building block ideas of foundational beliefs into a more coherent relational way of looking at how my beliefs work together to make sense of the world. That's why I love the idea of resonance so much. In the past, if I was confronted with or challenged by a belief or idea, I would see if it fit within the belief structure that I had from my growing up years. If it fitted, great. If it didn't, I rejected it as wrong. Now, when a new way of thinking crosses my path, I see if it resonates with what I already believe. If it does, even if it doesn't seem at first glance to have anything in common with how I look at the world, then I let it stay in my orbit. Usually, I discover that my belief systems expand to allow this new idea to find its place. Let me give you an example. Growing up, I was taught that homosexuality was wrong. This belief was a foundational belief resting on an interpretation of the writings of Paul, an interpretation that was commonly accepted not only in churches but in society. For example, homosexuality was punishable by jail time in my lifetime. When my eldest son was younger, I began to think about the fact that I had no guarantees that my children would follow my faith path or be heterosexual. What would I do then? I decided when he was about 4 that I would love him regardless of the path he chose. Many years later, as I've studied the Bible as part of my theology degree, I discovered that the words that had been used so definitively against homosexuality were not as clear-cut as the church wanted me to believe. The words categorically translated as homosexuality and imbued with 20th and 21st century meanings actually referred to sexual practices between masters and their slaves of both sexes. And I started to think about how I'd never questioned my straight cis self and began to think what it would be like to do the journey of coming out if I'd been homosexual. My beliefs around sexuality, gender preference, transgender were now more coherent. They resonated with the belief that people are people. All we want is the same things, regardless of how we turn up in the world. I want you to think about what shaped your beliefs. It doesn't have to be a faith system. And which beliefs have shaped you? Are they foundational beliefs? Are they coherent beliefs? Are they still helpful? Do they still serve you? Our beliefs can define us. One of the results of foundational beliefs is that we can use them to define who we are. I did that in terms of being a woman based on what I'd been and what I'd seen in my faith culture. The role of women was carefully defined: daughter, wife, mother. I saw this in my family. My mum had no choice regarding work as once she got married, she had to give up her role in the Commonwealth Bank, as she would have been taking a job that a married man may need to support his family in the 1950s. I saw this modelled in other families in the street I grew up in. I saw this modelled in my church. There were no working mothers there. Let me read you a poem I wrote a number of years ago now as I was sorting through the beliefs that shaped me and still expressed my life purely in terms of my faith. It's called There Is Another Picture. There was another option, another possibility, another picture for her life that she couldn't really see, a picture planned ahead of time by a very loving hand, a picture only God could see that she didn't understand. In the picture formed for her, a life stretched out in view that took in all her talents, her loves and desires too. But she couldn't see this picture that was mature, complete and full because she had another dream with a strong and steady pull. Her family and upbringing had shaped what she could see. She thought she'd follow in the steps of a happy family. She'd want what they had wanted. She'd do what they had done. She'd marry, have a family, a son. But there was another picture, another option for her life that she only discovered when she was no more a wife. It was only through the shattering of a cherished, long-held dream that life could take another shape, be more than it would seem. Like Alice down the rabbit hole and Neo with his pill, there was a new reality, a new dream to fulfill, one shaped not by family culture nor by what others may have done, a life shaped by her Heavenly Father, a new and different one. So, with the precipice before her, the shattered picture left behind, she leapt into the future and knows that she will find that all that is awaiting her will fit her like a glove, will show her who she truly is, a gift from her Father with love. Now, I understand that poem was shaped by my faith in God, but I think it really conveys how much we can be limited by one particular outlook, and that there is so often a much greater, bigger picture for our lives than we originally thought. So take some time. What beliefs have defined you? Where did these beliefs come from? Are they still helpful? Do they still reflect who you truly are? Our beliefs can limit us. Our beliefs can become like a box inside which we hide ourselves. The box can feel safe and secure. It has carefully defined boundaries. It even has a lid that we can close over the top of us. In fact, our beliefs can actually keep us in the dark. Now, our beliefs can keep us safe, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if our beliefs confine us within carefully prescribed boundaries, we may find out that we're missing out on so much more. We may find that we're limiting ourselves to what other people believe about us, other people's beliefs that we have assumed are true and that we choose to follow or abide by. You only have to look at the commentary around, say, perhaps high-profile rape cases to see the beliefs that limit women. Beliefs that prescribe what women should wear. Well, what was she wearing? How they behave. Oh, how much did she have to drink? The truth of what they say. Oh, women, they make these things up. They just want to get the money. And when women find themselves in difficult circumstances, then those beliefs limit what a woman deserves in consequence and whether she is believed or not. On a less public level, perhaps in our workplaces, where have you seen the beliefs of others limiting you and your career? Where have you seen your own beliefs getting in the way of what you can achieve? Take some time, give it some thought. We can have courageous conversations with the expectations of others. Now, I've been convinced for a while that women do different things differently to men. Duh, I hear you say, shaking your head. But let me expand on that idea. Business, academia, the sciences, the arts, education, sport, all fields of endeavour have been shaped, inhabited and controlled by men for millennia. Makes sense. Traditionally, men have been the ones who worked outside the home while women worked inside the home. In the last 100 years or so, women have been inching their way into all of these spaces. Some have earned themselves international accolades, think Marie Curie, or led nations, Indira Gandhi, Angela Merkel, Golda Meir. Others, like Elizabeth Gould, have been overlooked, overshadowed by their husbands' achievements. Elizabeth Gould was the illustrator for all her husband John's amazing ornithological publications. But in all their endeavours, women have had to fit themselves into the shapes and structures made by men. They have had to play by the accepted rules of the sandpit. That's what I call it, the sandpit, without knowing what those rules were or how really to play the game. Now, all of this is understandable, and it's in no way a criticism of the structures and processes men have put in place. But making space for women has been hard, both for the men who can see this as a zero-sum game, I have to lose for you to win, and for women who have often bent themselves out of shape to fit in. There is, however, another way that women have been finding for years, but at this point in history are really making their own. It began with women like Melbourne's Alice Anderson, who in the 1920s ran businesses of their own. Alice established the first motor service in Australia run entirely by women, including car repairs and chauffeuring, an early she-bar perhaps. And it's gained super momentum during the pandemic as women who were laid off more quickly than their male counterparts during lockdowns then went on to establish businesses of their own. But it's more than just building our own businesses. And I return to my original statement. I'm convinced that women do things differently to men. Women need to own their different ways of thinking. Not better or worse than men, just different. Women must learn to trust their different ways of thinking and follow up on their hunches and intuition, especially if all their lives they've been taught that the way men do things is the right way. It takes courage to set up new ways of doing business, and women are known for their courage. I'm sure we've all heard of Rosa Parks. Seamstress Rosa Parks is most well known for being the African American civil rights activist who the US Congress dubbed the mother of the modern day civil rights movement. Parks's famous refusal on the 1st of December 1955 to obey a bus driver's demand that she give up her seat to a white man, her subsequent arrest and trial for this act of civil disobedience triggered the Montgomery bus boycott, one of the largest and most successful mass movements against racial segregation in history. Her actions have left an enduring legacy for civil rights movements around the world. Rosa Parks' courageous conversation consisted of a simple no. It's not the length of the conversation that counts, but the courageous intent to bring equilibrium into the world. We sometimes have to have courageous conversations about family expectations. Think about these things. If you could describe your family in one word, the family of origin, the family you grew up in, what would that be? What has been expected of you and your family? Perhaps because of where you are in the birth order. Perhaps because of your gender. Which expectations have you questioned? And why have you done that? Equally, which expectations have you never questioned? Why have you done that? As I built a new life post-divorce and reflected on my 28-year marriage, I recognised that I'd gone into marriage with a lot of expectations. Well, who doesn't? Those expectations were shaped by my parents' relationship and what the church taught a good Christian marriage should be. During the marriage, I learned to step back from many of these expectations, coming to understand that expectations are actually a killer. They kill the moment. And in seeking some elusive tomorrow, expectations kill both today and the what is. As I weathered the aftermath of divorce, I had to navigate the expectations that others had of me, many of which were expressed in extremely hurtful ways. Most came out of other people's inability to deal with my divorce, because I was no longer doing what was expected of a good Christian. Although I recognised that these expectations of me, just as mine were of my ex in our marriage, were not necessarily valid, they weighed heavily, especially when I made decisions and acted in my best interests. Somehow I just couldn't separate myself from that weight. It lay there like a dead thing around my neck. I did that clarity by contrast exercise, and I wrote down all of those critical thoughts, I crossed them out, wrote more positive ones, and each time a negative thought bubbled up, I would read and reread my affirmations, which basically said the expectations of others were their own. And I found that by doing that, I was separating myself from the expectations of others. I could stand back, see that the expectations of others belonged to them. It was not my business to carry them or bear that weight. What I was doing was becoming a separate entity. I was standing back and looking at how those expectations and seeing them in a completely detached way. I was placing ownership exactly where it belonged, with other people. I try hard not to have expectations of others. I work at taking people just as they are. But expectations can creep in unaware. When I notice them, I can take ownership of them. If someone disappoints me because they fail to meet an unspoken expectation, that's on me. It's my responsibility to deal with how I feel about the situation and how I will respond. It takes courage to confront the expectations of others, to act in a healthy way in the face of that weight. And it also takes courage to confront our own expectations of others, to own what we need to, and then let things go. And then there are the expectations of friends and colleagues, and we sometimes need to have courageous conversations with these as well. Think back to your school years. Who was in your friendship group? If you could go back, would you choose those friends? Or would you perhaps hang out with different people? What has or hasn't changed? After I returned from my last rotation when I was working on Nauru with asylum seekers, I spent some time adjusting to life back in Sydney, resting and resetting. I had a new appointment with the Salvation Army, which was only 20 minutes drive from where I was living in the inner west of Sydney. I was to have an associate role with a couple who ran the Salvo Centre with lots of programs and activities, and I was sure I would find a place for myself there. Within a couple of days of being in the office, I inadvertently overstepped an invisible line about how things were done in the centre. I can't even remember what it was because it was so trivial. But what does stick in my memory are the words one of the office staff, when she apologised to me for neglecting to tell me about a particular procedure, she said, "I'm sorry I got you into trouble with," and then filling in the name of the officer in charge. Get me into trouble? Those were the words out of my childhood, perhaps even my teen years at school and at home. They weren't words I expected to hear in a workplace full of mature adults. But it wasn't long before I saw that getting into trouble was an everyday reality for staff who worked under this person, and they walked on eggshells trying really hard not to overstep the mark. While I didn't feel confident enough yet to confront the officer about her management style, which was passive-aggressive micromanaging, it wasn't long before my idea of how an adult operates clashed with hers. We came to verbal blows, and I told her to stop treating me like a child. Apart from the couple in leadership, my relationships with most of the people at the centre were great, and I even caught up with some of the refugees who had been on Nauru and who are now living in the inner west of Sydney. However, my time in that appointment was short, and I moved to Melbourne to work in the Salvo editorial department. Like most people, I don't like conflict or confrontation, but I've learnt that I can't just accept the norms of a workplace just because they're ones put in place or supported by leadership, especially when those norms keep others in their place and allow leaders to operate with little or no accountability for their actions and attitudes. It takes courage to challenge accepted norms at work, but for me, this is about justice. Justice treats people fairly. It doesn't continue to privilege one person over another just because that's the way it's always been done. Then there are cultural expectations that we may need to have courageous conversations with. What do you think of when you hear the word culture? Culture can take many shapes. It can be linked to ethnicity through dress, behaviour, food. It can be linked to sport, sporting culture of fair play and teamwork. It can be linked to a faith group. In my last year of high school, a satirical newsletter was put out by the students finishing Year 12 that featured anecdotes from our final year at school. Included was a playlist of songs that was matched with various students. The song matched to me was "Say a Little Prayer for Me." This was the early 1970s. An appropriate song, as I was a regular churchgoer, the quintessential good girl. That's how I'd been raised, to be polite, nice, obedient, sexually pure, compliant, no swearing, little alcohol, no smoking. This was normal for me, although I knew that many of my peers lived very different lives. These patterns of behaviour, while not bad or unhealthy in themselves, came with a variety of restrictions and unwritten codes that I had to follow. And I followed them because this was normal for me. I didn't question them until years into my marriage when, despite much effort, tears, thought and turmoil, I decided to leave. I committed what I saw as the cardinal sin, separation and divorce. After all, the only pre-marriage counselling given to my then husband and I was, don't get divorced. Despite the pain and grief of leaving, I look back and see that divorce was one of the best things that happened to me. This huge life step was the catalyst for me to assess so much of what I'd been taught since childhood about how to behave, what a woman should or could do. Because unsurprisingly, after divorcing, the earth still spun on its axis. The sky didn't fall, and I continued to have a sense that God was guiding me. Challenging the church's commitment to marriage at all costs allowed me space to question other things, particularly around how people relate to each other. I came to see that passive-aggressive behaviour was rife in churches. Their commitment to everyone being kind and nice meant the people often had no way of dealing with their anger. They had to suppress it. And that passive-aggressive abuse is real. I call it death by 1,000 cuts. So hard to see when it's happening to you. No marks or bruises, not even any yelling, but the damage done is immense and takes years to heal. It takes courage to say goodbye to patterns of behaviour and relationships that have worked in the past but are no longer useful. I had to unlearn ways of relating to people. I learned to say what I wanted to say rather than beating around the bush, hoping people would pick up on my subtle hints. I learned to choose people to be in my life who were healthy for me. This took quite a while to learn, and in some respects I think I'm still learning. I learnt that I don't owe people an explanation for my choices, nor do I need to tell everyone what I'm doing. I only need to be an open book with those I trust and who are safe for me. It takes courage to say goodbye to patterns of behaviour and relationships from our cultural upbringing that have worked in the past but are no longer useful, but it is necessary work. Thanks for joining with me for Courageous Conversations. We've looked at so many different areas of our lives in which we can have courageous conversations, and I hope you have taken away some actionable steps and changes that you can make. If you'd like to know more, just use the QR code and that will take me through to my website. I've got my contact details there. Please get in touch. I'd love to know what you found useful, what perhaps you would have liked to know more about. It'd be great to be in touch. Catch you again.